Hey, here we are again, another podcast. Going to continue our discussion from last week when we talked about the greatest commandment.
Yeah.
And this is the second one, is like it as Jesus says. But what I liked with last week's, and if you guys didn't watch last week's and you're watching right now, you should probably go back and check it out. You can find it on YouTube. We have a whole playlist of podcasts. Really easy for you to find there. But we kind of broke down the Greek behind what Jesus was saying and the words he was using. So I kind of want to take that same tact in this and kind of break down that second commandment in the same way. Because Jesus, here he presented the idea that all of the Old Testament law could be summed up in just these two things. Because this scribe heard what he had said previously and was like, this guy's pretty sharp. I want to hear what he has to say about this, and asked him what was the greatest commandment. Because these guys debated that kind of stuff. It was like their job.
Right.
And so Jesus pops off, love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. And then he says, and so the other one is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And so that's an impressive answer, like off the top of your head. But what else would he expect from Jesus? He wrote the commandments.
He did it. Yeah,
he kind of knows which one is most important.
And what the purpose and meaning of it is, how to sum it up.
Yeah, what does each one of them really mean? And so as he's doing this, he's summing up everything. All of the moral commands that we find, and the ceremonial commands and the civil commands. Because remember in the Old Testament, for the Jewish nation, and this is where some people go off the rails. Like the Jews, the law covered everything for them. It was their criminal code. It was their civil law code. It was their ceremonial code. And it was how they were to basically, treat others. So it covered everything. Culturally, civil law, criminal, like the punishment for all these different crimes. It was all found there. So for the Jews, the Old Testament law that we find was kind of like taking our Constitution, our criminal law, our civil law, and religion and smashing them all together. And so where a lot of people get confused about the Old Covenant is they'll go, well, we don't have to, we don't sacrifice animals anymore. You don't have to wear certain kinds of fabrics. Like you can't, if you kill a guy's goat, you don't have to give him a cow or whatever the penalty may have been. Mm-hmm. Well, they missed the point. Like they did, like when people make that argument, I'll be blunt, that is a simpleton argument from somebody that does not have any background or understanding of the Bible. So even if you don't believe in God or in the Bible and you're going to make arguments against the Bible, you should at least be able to make an intelligent argument that understands the principles that are being taught in the Bible.
Well, I don't know. I think there's a lot of Christians that don't fully understand that aspect of it.
Oh, I'm sure they don't. But they at the same time are not trying to use an argument like that to undermine the authenticity of Scripture. Okay. They may be ignorant to that, but they're not using a faulty argument to try to say, well, we shouldn't pay attention to the Bible because, it at one point it talked about goats and fabric or something. I think
it would be good though for even Christians to know so that they can give a defense when necessary.
And
because increasingly people are attacking Christianity, and they'll go after any inconsistencies that are in their mind, they will use as an attack.
Without understanding it's not really an inconsistency. But I addressed this in a sermon. It was quite some time back. It was when I was talking about the book by Andy Stanley where he said to unhitch.
Right.
And the sermon that he did to unhitch from the Old Testament. And in that sermon, I explained there are three parts to the Old Testament. There's the civil law, there's the moral law, which would also encompass for them the even criminal law, like because they even like thou shalt not murder, and they literally had the penalty. And then there was civil, moral, ceremonial. In the Bible, when we look forward, we see that the civil and the ceremonial we have been released from. Like we don't deal with those anymore. But the moral code of the Old Testament is restated pretty much word for word in the New Testament. It's all sitting there. It's all sitting there in front of us. I mean, but we know that the ceremonial we were set free from, Jesus made that very clear. I mean, we deal with that in the book of Acts with Peter. It's very, very clear. And then, when we talk about suing our neighbors and those kind of things, as we think about civil, like civil law, he ran over my fence, I'm suing him to make him fix it, kind of thing. We have our own law codes for that. We don't need that. So they broke it apart. And so what Jesus is doing here is he's kind of putting all of this together in one package and encompassing everything that the moral law, yes, that the moral law had all in one bucket. And even to an extent, the ceremonial, I would say too. Because at this point...
Or civil.
They had, the ceremony, but the civil would fall in
the ceremonial was like the cleansing. And...
It was. But they had not been set free from that yet. This is before the crucifixion. So until the crucifixion and the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, they were still bound to that ceremonial. Jesus went to the temple to worship and made sacrifice. And he did. So the civil would also go along with the love your neighbor as yourself, whereas if you've wronged someone, make it right. So he encompasses all those things. But I think the moral part is the main part that we think about. And so first is, honor God. And the second, he deals with the neighbor. And he even says the second is equally important. So it builds upon the first. And so Jesus kind of volunteers this because the guy doesn't ask about a second. He just asks for the first. The first says, second is equally important. And he tells them to love your neighbor as yourself. How many times in church do you hear that quoted? I've heard it, treat others as you want to be treated. We've kind of changed it over the
golden
years.
Rule.
Yeah, and applied it across, culture and taken it really out of its Christian background and concept. It's where it's a great, this particular statement by Christ, this commandment that he gives is a great example of the Judeo-Christian worldview that has permeated the entirety of Western culture. A large segment of Western culture is built upon this particular idea.
Okay, but at the same time, it's really hard for me to separate and understand because I do come from a Western thought process, but does it not span cultures?
No. Absolutely not.
Okay, so our sense of justice is very different. Than...
Yes.
Okay.
You go across history, there were groups of people that were second-class citizens. The Western world has dealt with that too, because for centuries there was slavery within Western culture,
right?
And those people were second-class citizens. And we think of that as just being what we've termed race-based slavery. Like we dealt with in the United States. But you go back further in Western culture, you go back to Greece, you go back to Rome, you go back to some of those kind of things. It wasn't race-based, it was just slavery. But those people were still deemed second-class citizens.
Even at that time, not necessarily in the Jewish culture, but Roman culture especially, children were second-class citizens.
Yes.
And women even in some aspects.
Yes, yes. And so Jesus is laying down here a principle that, we're still trying to get right, as cultures as a whole and as individuals. We're still working on this loving your neighbor as yourself, because we're really, really good at loving ourselves and we're really, really bad at loving other people. Like that's
we
in us.
Talked some about that in Sunday school this week, and I just keep thinking about what does it mean to really love your neighbor, to love someone else. I think it's different than the culture says it is, but at the same time, I don't know that even within the church that we always get it right either. It's difficult.
Yeah, take a stab at the Greek word for love that's used there. of the
Well,
different
I
ones?
think last time I mentioned, was it phileo?
Brotherly
But
love.
I was thinking about the second one, not the godly, not love the Lord, but for the love your neighbor. That's the one I was thinking of, but that's not it either.
It's agape too.
Which is the sacrificial love.
Yes. It's the same kind of love that God loves us with, unconditionally and purposefully. So when you back up from that, this isn't just brotherly love. Naturally, you understand it's not what's been termed eros, which is kind of the romantic love. That's the love between, like, a husband and a wife kind of situation. We are to love people as God loves people. That's hard.
It is hard because I see how I love my child, and I think that is the type of love that you're supposed to have for other people. Even when she's wrong, even I show grace. It doesn't mean that I don't show discipline. It doesn't mean that I don't know that there is a right way and that she needs to follow that way, that there's not consequences for things. But I show grace. I have patience and want good things for her. And I think that that's how we should love other people as well.
But it's hard because they're not our children. The
connection isn't there. It's not
your mother or father, your physical brother or sister. It's not your child. It's not your husband or wife. It's not this person that you have a deep and abiding relationship with that may span decades.
Well, and it'd be different if you had unlimited resources with time, money, energy, emotional bandwidth.
I was supposed to use the word bandwidth there. Yeah.
Take in everyone else's problems. It is overwhelming. How do you love your neighbor when you have finite resources?
I wish I could tell you exactly how I'm supposed to get that right every time, but here's the thing. We aren't, because we live in a fallen world. We live in a broken world full of sin. Now, does that excuse us? No, but we also have to sometimes give ourselves some grace and know we're going to mess up and we're going to have to try to do better next time.
I mean, I almost think of it as what it is versus what it isn't. And I know a lot of times what it's not. I know that loving your neighbor is not affirming things that are untrue, saying things like agreeing, affirming, all of these things that I don't have to do that to love them. I also don't have to give to every person that's on the streets that has their signs and stuff. I don't,
because so much of that we don't know what's true and what's not.
And it's not like you have to be a doormat. You don't have to be a doormat. I don't think that's it, because sometimes loving people is putting boundaries. Just like with my child, there are boundaries. I'm not going to just let her get away with everything. I'm going to hold her accountable.
Loving someone doesn't mean embracing and accepting everything they do and say. That's not. God doesn't do that.
And just giving away everything that you have, I don't think that that's it either.
No.
But at the same time, I do think that we need to leave. I don't know what the answer is for how to love exactly, but I do think that we could do better at leaving, and I said this on Sunday in Sunday school, some margin in our lives. Leave margin with your finances so that you can help people when God shows you that that's what you should do. Leave margin in your schedule. Don't pack it so full that you can't help and love your neighbor with your time. And try to leave some margin with your emotions. If you're so packed, there's different seasons in your life. I know that I'm coming out of a season where I was laser focused on problems with my child and dealing with very difficult health issues with her. I didn't have a lot of margin emotionally.
Yeah.
And that was a season. And I think that God brought in certain opportunities during that season where I could help in certain ways. But now that I'm coming out of that season a little bit more, I'm excited about opportunities that I have to give more. And
like you were helping paint somebody's house today.
Yeah, just to love people the way that I want to. And I know that there's things that you can't control. I couldn't control that about, dealing with stuff with Charlie.
God placed you in that situation.
It was a burden, but I grew through it. I know God had a purpose for it, but at the same time, there are things that I do have choices about. I don't have to buy so many clothes and so many things. I don't have money to
help someone
in need. I don't have to say yes to every frivolous activity so that I'm so swamped I can't say yes to other things. I don't know. Those are just some thoughts that I've had this week about loving people.
So you've been thinking about it. Apart from this is just something.
Well, I didn't. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember we were going to do this?
No. Sam actually asked me today. She said, "What are y'all talking about in podcasts?" I was like, I never really know until I sit down in the chair next to you. But
makes it more authentic. Yeah. When we sit down, it just like I know kind of where we should go, but
you steer the conversations where it needs to be.
Yeah. But we oftentimes, we find ourselves where we're at. So the thing that got me when I was looking at this was really two things. The fact that the word there is agape, and it's telling me how I'm supposed to love that person. And that's tough. I'm not going to say it's not. Because, dude, there's some folks out there that are just flat out difficult. I'm just being honest.
I think that's where the emotional side of it comes in, because it's hard to love people, but when they do something to hurt you.
Yes.
And I think that's where that agape love comes in, that self-sacrifice. I'm going to sacrifice my pride, or I'm going to sacrifice my own preference in this situation, and I'm going to get over it and know that I've said things that have been hurtful.
I absolutely have.
And I'm going to have grace in this situation.
Yeah. And it's tough. It's tough, and then I think on the other side is, even when it's not a difficult person, sometimes when there's a person in need, we can be selfish because we want, instead of focusing on others, we focus on self. I think it's really natural for us. I was, I'll tell you, God tested me yesterday. I was talking to David before the second service. Me and Pastor Dave were chatting for a minute. And I was telling him, I slept too late Saturday morning, and then I couldn't go to sleep Saturday night. So I was working on about, I don't know, maybe 5 hours sleep, probably closer to 4.5. Something like that. And
which is hard on a Sunday.
And it's a busy day, man. Like I preached 3 times, and it's just, and then I had deacons meeting Sunday afternoon, so I knew any hope of a nap, Sunday afternoon nap is the best thing ever. I knew it would be cut short, and so I was like, okay, so what I'm going to do, as soon as the service is over, I'm going to go get something to eat, and I'm going to go home. And I'm going to eat as fast as I can, and I'm going to lay down for a few minutes, and I'm going to get back up and, hit the ground running, take care of what I need to the rest of the afternoon and the evening. I even texted you to tell you that I was going to stop at Zaxby's, because I knew if I came home with a Zaxby's bag.
Yeah, that would not be cool.
Even if I'd called you and told you and you had already eaten, it might not be cool. So anyway, I sent you the text. You were very appreciative. It was a good. So marriage pro tip there, guys. Always tell the ladies when you're going to pick up something, so they don't eat ahead of time. So I get done, and I'm chatting with a couple people, but I'm heading towards the door, I hung around after the invitation to make sure that in a reasonable period of time nobody wanted to come talk to me or anything. And so I kind of start to buzz out, and a lady catches me and actually talked to me for a second, which is perfectly fine. And so I start talking to her, and let me tell you, what she talked to me about is just a smidge more difficult than me having a short nap. I mean, she was dealing with some very difficult things in her family and having to take care of a family member that was really struggling with medical things. And so she said, I get scared sometimes at night. Do you have any devotionals? I like to read a devotional at night. And I said, we've got some daily breads somewhere, because I don't even know where I would locate them. So I had to go into multiple places in the church to find it and then get it back to her. And as a result, instead of getting to Zaxby's right quick, I was like the last person to leave the church.
Yeah.
And there was a big old line at Zaxby's. But I'm glad God gave me that encounter. Because, honestly, I was in that moment. I was kind of thinking about self. Okay, I'm going to have me a good chicken sandwich, and then I'm going to take a nap. That was what was on my brain.
Yeah.
And God redirected me and was like, no, like people. And I did not begrudge at all going to find those things for her. I was happy to do it. But he just kind of redirected me and was like, hey, man.
From self-focused to
other focused.
Outward.
And I shifted to the other focused pretty quickly, especially after she started sharing like what was happening in her life. I was like, yeah, you need this right now. Like, you need me right now. And so I immediately like turned from that. But it was just like God was saying, it ain't about you. It's about this. You'll get some Zaxby's and you'll get a nap for a few minutes maybe. But hey, dude, you got to take care of this. And it was a really good conversation. I was able to get the person what they needed. And I'm glad that encounter happened. But it just kind of snapped me, because I was even thinking about it driving home, not in relation to this, but just like, wow, that kind of just reordered my thought process.
But think about if you consistently went to bed late all the time
Mm-hmm.
and were overly tired on a regular basis. Think about when you as a pastor had people approach you.
All the time.
But most lay people are going to have their eyes open, like their spiritual eyes and ears open for different opportunities that might come about. Mm-hmm. And if you're consistently overtired, you're overworked, you're running hither and yon, it's going to be harder, because that opportunity might come in Walmart. And how many times have I walked through Walmart thinking, gotta get in, gotta get out, gotta go fast, gotta get back to the car, and then there's annoyance with all the number of people that are in there. There's not enough lines
There's just
available.
annoyance of being in
so
Walmart.
Much that can bring about negativity that are my eyes open for opportunities that God might have ordained for that day.
Yeah.
So I think that it's difficult to
thinking about others and how God might use you, because you think about the next, outside of the word love in this, I think, the rest of it's very, self-explanatory. The next part is as yourself. And we'll love your neighbor as yourself. As yourself is understandable, your neighbor is interesting, because how is neighbor defined by the Bible? Jesus defined it really well.
I don't know, tell me.
He defined it in the parable of the Good Samaritan.
So everyone that you come into contact with.
Everyone that I come into contact with is my neighbor. It's not just the person living next door to me. It's not the person that I go to church with. It's not the person that I've been friends with for 20 years. It's every person that I come into contact with, whether I know them or not. Like, Jesus made that really clear in that parable. So as he lays this out, we know from Scripture the exact definition that he is giving. It's not the person that looks like me. It's not the person that runs in my circles. It's anyone. I read a commentator about this. He said it's anyone that wears a skin suit. I thought that's a really funny way to put it. So any human is a part of this. So that's an important section of it, to think about that, and that goes along with what you're saying, in that we run across these. We can run across these things anywhere, in any place, at any time, where God opens the door for us to show that love for a neighbor. My example from Sunday was, a sweet, nice lady that comes to church, loves the Lord. Like, that's a person in my circle, right? That's the kind of folks that come up and talk to me and I encounter on a really regular basis. But I think it's way outside of that too. It's not just that. So I think we've got to keep our eyes open for those things.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you guys for being here and being a part of our podcast today. And we'd love to see you in person at one of our services at FBC Okeechobee at either 9 a.m. or 11:15. We'll see you guys there.